You can add so much to your fantasy world by giving it a writing system, or at least hinting at one. If you feel like your book needs more of something to make it feel real, this might be the perfect way to do it. In real life, writing developed independently in several parts of the world that never had any contact with each other, and in a lot of cases, didn't even know about the existence of each other. A lot of the time, it would be pieces of art or different symbols that had some kind of meaning that then got reappropriated. And once a writing system starts, it's not set in stone. The way that the Old Kingdom and the New Kingdom of Egypt used hieroglyphs was quite different. In China, we have traditional Chinese characters and simplified Chinese characters. And if a place evolves writing, a lot of other places do tend to pick it up that are nearby. A good example of this is Japan. When China invented the Hanzi, Japan then started using them as well, and they started calling them the kanji. Something that's really cool is with China, their writing system is logographic, which means it's, different little symbols that are supposed to convey something. When Japan took them, they kept a lot of those meanings, and because of that, there have been Japanese and Chinese people who can't understand each other's languages, but throughout history, there have been princes, kings and queens, emperors, shoguns, what have you, that were able to exchange letters with each other. And even though they were writing in different languages, they were able to understand by looking at the symbols and the meaning they convey. Sometimes it would take a little bit of guesswork, of course, but it still gave them that capability. A really famous example of writing, and one of the oldest, is the Sumerians. They started writing down different symbols on sort of tablets of a type of wet clay, basically, that would let them keep inventory of supplies and crops. Now, over time, these characters that they were drawing became associated with certain sounds and whatnot, and that's kind of how writing started in that region. Originally, Sumerians would write from top to bottom, and they'd start on the right side of the page and work their way to the left. A problem, if you're writing on basically wet clay and you're right-handed, you finish your first line and now you move over, and you finish your second line, you move over. Now your hand and your wrist are smudging the wet clay that you just wrote on, and it's ruining everything you have written. So what scribes started to do was, instead of writing like this, they would flip the tablet over and they would write it like this, just like we do in English today. They'd go left to right, and at the end, they'd move down. They would draw the characters sideways because a normal person that reads it, which would tend to be another scribe, to be honest, they'll read it like top to bottom, and they'll move their way down. But over time, they just decided, hey, look, we're so used to writing left to right now, and everything is sideways. Let's just read it left to right too. Like, if you write something sideways and I'm writing the same stuff sideways and we're comparing notes, we can both read our sideways writing, and eventually that just becomes the normal way to do it. The reason, again, for the flip is because a right-handed person will finish their first line going left to right, and then they'll move down. That first line of text is now safe. I'm not going to rub my hand over it. So that's basically what fueled that change. Now, over time, the symbols did become more simple, until they stopped resembling the little pictures and icons that they once were. Because back in the day, it used to be like you look at the symbols and you got a pretty good idea, oh, this is wheat and this is how much wheat it says we have in the storeroom, right? Eventually, the wheat character, the wheat symbol, gets associated with a sound. It simplifies over time. Now we're writing it sideways so it looks less like wheat. Now it keeps simplifying further, and that's basically how you end up with letters. Approximately that same story is how we end up with our English alphabet too. The story goes, it started out as Egypt hieroglyphs, and then the people in the Sinai Peninsula decided to simplify it and stop writing such complex hieroglyphs. And then the Phoenicians, a really powerful sort of entity that I would say Lebanon was kind of the home base for the Phoenicians there. They co-opted that writing system from the people from Sinai. And then from there, they changed up that alphabet more. At that time, it was basically only consonants, right? Like letters like B, C, D, T, stuff like that. Those are what consonants are. But it didn't really work out that well when the Greeks learned about this writing system and they tried to apply it to their language, right? The Greeks co-opt the writing system from the Phoenicians. Greeks use a lot more vowels like A, E, I, O, U, that kind of stuff. So now they have to add letters of their own. They have to change it up. And then from the Greeks, it went to the Etruscans, people who were from northern Italy, but not part of Rome. They're from modern day Tuscany. That's why it's called Tuscany. It's Etruscan Tuscany. And then the Romans learned it from the Etruscans, and everybody has changed the alphabet along the way. It looks nothing like what it used to look. When Romans originally got it, it didn't quite look how it looks now, even in all capitals, but over a couple hundred years, eventually the more stereotypical Roman alphabet is what came about. The Russian alphabet is also based on that same writing system, except after it went to the Greeks, our alphabet went to the Etruscans and then to the Romans. But Greeks also brought that writing system north and had interactions with the Russians. So instead of the Etruscan and Roman changes, it went along a different set of changes along the way to Russia and in Russia. This path that our alphabet took, there's actually hints of it in modern words. Alphabet comes from alpha beta, which is Greek, and phonetics, which is the word that means the pronunciation of something, comes from the word Phoenician. So we've tackled hieroglyphs, right? Like pictures, basically. The Egyptians used them in very complex ways. Some pictures meant a specific word, and you would always say that specific word when you saw it. Like they would very explicitly draw an eye or a hawk or a bull. Other times, the hieroglyphs were a specific syllable that would be pronounced a specific way. Other times, you wouldn't say a hieroglyph out loud. It was just there to tell you how to pronounce the other ones. It was like a silent letter, basically. We've got that. That's a hieroglyphic one. The alphabet we've gone over. That is where every letter is a sound in and of itself, and then they combine to also make different sounds. But there's also a different type of alphabet, a syllabic one that is not picture-based. And that is what the Greeks used way before they came into contact with the other writing system. So the Minoans, people that lived in the modern island of Crete, they made their own hieroglyphs pretty independently. And from there, they simplified into a syllable-based alphabet. So if you see one symbol, it's not B, for example. It would be more like Ka or Ku or K. It would be a cluster of a sound. Basically what the modern day Japanese do with hiragana. Now, the Minoans, it simplifies from their own brand of hieroglyphics into the syllable-based writing system called Linear A. We aren't able to crack the code yet on Linear A. Nobody can read it yet. But it did travel over to the Mycenaean Greeks on the mainland, who are not to be confused with modern-day Greeks culturally, or even like ancient Rome Greeks culturally. Mycenaean Greeks were pre-Bronze Age collapse, and then after the Bronze Age collapse is basically the difference between Mycenaean Greeks and Hellenic Greeks. The Mycenaean Greeks, they take Linear A, that writing system, they co-opt it, they change it, they learn from it, they fit it to their own language, because the Minoans, they spoke a different language, even though they lived in a Greek island. And we can read what the Mycenaean Greeks invented based on it. It's called Linear B. Like I said, the code is cracked on that one. It's also a syllable-based writing system. So if you do decide that you want to add writing systems into your book or your fantasy series, you don't have to do letters, you don't have to do pictures, you can also do a syllable-based alphabet. So now I want to go over a few different ways that this can add depth to your fantasy world. I want it to very explicitly relate to writing fantasy, or any other genre, whatever. If you're here to learn any type of writing, here you are. Here's the video. It's for you too. But what if your character sees a writing system and they vaguely recognize it as basically like theirs, but it must be a really old version because it's written in a different direction and the symbols are all sideways and messed up, but maybe they can understand it, maybe they can't. Either way, that indicates a lot of rich history. That makes it feel like a real world, something that people have actually lived in. Keep in mind too, those symbols, not only might they be in a different direction and seem like they're sideways to your character, but they also might be way more complex versions of the same letters or whatever that your character is familiar with. Maybe they do understand it though, because this language is still written like this in religious or ceremonial purposes. This could be what leads them to solve some kind of mystery. Maybe it's the final piece of the puzzle or some kind of initial piece of the puzzle that sets them along their way. Maybe your character intercepts a message from a rival kingdom that they share a writing system with, especially if it's a logographic writing system like Japanese and Chinese. Maybe they don't understand any of the, they don't know how to pronounce the words or anything, but they understand the meaning or the majority of the meaning because of the meaning behind the symbols, and they're able to decipher what this message in this foreign language says. I had an experience a little bit like that in real life, much lower stakes, but it does reinforce what I'm saying here. I used to work at a grocery store back in the day, and everybody was looking through the back of the store in the big warehouse sort of section for a box full of disposable masks. And it's just like a brown unmarked box with some Chinese characters on it. Now, I've studied Japanese pretty extensive, at least back in the day I did. I can still hold a pretty sufficient conversation in it. I'm rusty though. Basically illiterate, but at the time I was pretty decent at reading for a foreigner. So everybody's looking around and everybody's like, oh man, we're out of these masks right now and we need them right now. And in a giant warehouse, I was able to point pretty immediately to a specific box and I was like, it's that one right there. And everybody's like, how do you know? And I point at the box and I point at the Chinese characters and I'm like, one, use, next, life, mouth. And then there was a bunch of other characters that I couldn't read. But they get that box out, open it up. Sure enough, it's a bunch of disposable masks. So again, very low stakes, only relevant to the situation at hand because I'm making a point that it is very realistic that you can add that to your fantasy book. Maybe your character intercepts that letter and maybe there's a big misunderstanding and a big problem that stems because they can only read half of it and they end up making the wrong choice and it creates issues. Could be anything. Maybe they provoke the rival kingdom, thinking the rival kingdom's trying to do something untoward as like a secret mission. Maybe they intercept something about military movements and they think the attack is going to go to this specific castle, so they bolster that one, and the attack actually comes to a different one because the guy read the letter wrong. Or maybe like in real life, the characters are able to correspond to or have a correspondence with somebody who doesn't speak their language as long as they write. Let's talk very explicitly about what kind of writing systems there are. First is hieroglyphs, right? Even if you can't read a hieroglyph, you look at it and you know exactly what it's supposed to be. If you look at an Egyptian wall and you're seeing like storks and an eye and Anubis or a guy, you understand what those pictures are. That's hieroglyphics. Again, they can be used in multiple ways. They can have a certain sound. They could mean a certain word. Or they could be silent and just tell you how other hieroglyphs in that word are pronounced. There's also logographs. They're different than hieroglyphics because if you look at a logograph, you don't actually necessarily know what they are right away. For example, if you were to look at Chinese or Japanese and you look at the Hanzi or the Kanji, you don't immediately know what that is a picture of. But if somebody says, hey, this is a person and this is why it looks like a person, now you're like, oh, okay, I see it, yeah. If somebody says this is a tree and this is why it looks like a tree, then you're like, okay, yeah, I see it. Same with fire or rice field, stuff like that. It's not immediately obvious necessarily what they are, but these symbols do convey a consistent meaning. That's what a logograph is. The symbol could be a whole word, it could be just a symbol, but it's going to be a recurring thing. Then we have the syllabic alphabets where every single symbol is a syllable, like a cluster of letters that you would pronounce. And then there's the alphabet where every single letter is a different sound, and then maybe they come together to influence how others are spelled. Maybe there's silent ones as well. There's a lot of different types of writing systems. Something I want to touch on logographic writing systems before we move on is that different logographs can combine to make a new logograph or a new word. For example, if we take rice field and power and we put rice field on top of power, that means man. Why does it mean man? Well, to my understanding, it's because like typically a dude will own the rice field, and the bigger the rice field, the more influential and powerful they are, right? Lords and daimyos and shoguns, they'll have more land. Peasants, they'll have less land and therefore less rice fields, for example. As I'm going back over the logograph real quick, I do just want to touch on syllabic writing systems again. A lot of us have a hard time understanding stuff like that. So we would have, for example, Japanese hiragana. A single symbol would be ka or ku, ke, ki, ko. Or another set of symbols would be na, nu, ne, ni, no. And each symbol is a cluster of sounds that come together. So the word taberu written in kanji would be ta, and then a be, and then the ru. And in Japanese specifically, you could use the kanji for that as well. But you still had the beru because the language didn't quite fit the writing system. They had to brute force it to kind of work better. Now, another thing to think about, writing systems do change over time. We talked about that very explicitly. It is a very good way to offer insight into your world and how it changes and make it feel like a real place. Silent letters and whatnot, different sort of maybe nonsensical spellings. Like the letter K would have been pronounced in night and knife and knee at one point. You don't have to spend a million years on this. As a matter of fact, I would very explicitly advise you not to. I would just dedicate, if it makes sense, a few sentences here and there. Just sprinkle it a bit. It's like seasoning every now and again to add a lot of depth and reality to your world. This is not me saying, hey, if you're procrastinating your writing by doing a bunch of world building, here's more world building to procrastinate with. You got to get out there, you got to write, you got to do your work, or else the book won't exist. And this is just a little something to consider if you feel like it's right for you and if you want to add depth. That's all I have for today. So if you got any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comment section below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.